I've started just with this interesting little piece. This is from one of the artworks I'll be talking about today from My Name is Owen, one of these random sentences. And it actually had some, it's funny how profound some of these things are. And when I'm talking about the artists in this exhibition, it's not actually me. I'm talking about the people that are in the artworks that Siftor pulls up, just to make sure this is not like an ego trip on me. And I'm going to talk a bit about how these sentences are actually generated later on as well. And there are still a few buttons left, I think 4 that I can see out of the original 80 that you can grab. So just to further a little bit of my interest and background, I'm not going to talk about either of these things, but I've done, I was a printmaker actually when I was at Emily Carr. I did stone lithography, among other things, often try to get computers onto the stone, and also did installation art and 3D computer animation. So that's actually very early, sort of my early, but also arguably one of my last exhibited artworks until this show in 1997 at Art Gallery in Vancouver. And it was a piece using computers and model trains. And then more recent work, which is starting to tie together this idea of arts and computer science much more tightly, is the digital Conte that I talked about at Baked Ham a little while ago. So I'm not going to talk about either of those things, but what's really great about this particular project is that this art and computer science are really starting to get mixed together, which is what was my objective and what I really want to do with my career, both as a researcher and as an artist. So I thought it might be interesting to sort of, a lot of this is a bit of sort of dropping the curtain or whatever, and it's sort of showing you some of the behind the scenes kind of things. And here's something that's interesting. So my Banting postdoctoral fellowship is actually with NSERC, which is the scientific granting agency. It's not even SSHRC. It's not even Canada Council. So this project really started with an idea, a research project, but I managed to layer on this idea of an art installation on top of it. And this was actually the title of the proposal, which is this sort of very sciencey way of saying Siftor, of what Siftor ended up being. And here's just a little page from that proposal, and you don't have to read it, but it's interesting how, and I just reread this recently, this goes back about 2 years ago when we did the proposal, and Jemmy was a big part of that proposal, and the Owens is a big part of that proposal. And it's really interesting to see how much art I layered into this proposal, even though it was a scientific granting agency. And it's great that they funded it. And the highlighted statement, just art galleries typically have a large education and outreach program with significant interest in electronic distribution. The system could be a way to connect this information with the physical gallery as information art. So I'm actually stating right there that I'm actually going to make an artwork, but I talk other places about how I'm going to do this kind of analysis. And I thought, looking back, I was kind of brave to get away with that. And I think it's great that it actually worked out the way I was hoping. And this idea of information art is maybe a term some of you are familiar with, and it can mean different things, but sort of like almost artworks that are both have an experience just on their own right, but also maybe teach you something without being pedantic, but being somewhat pedagogical, or maybe have some sort of information you can pull out of. And maybe a bizarre, but I think relevant example is, because I'm a big fan of Chris Burden's work, and most students, when you study Chris Burden, you talk about shoot, right? Like everyone, oh my gosh, he got shot, right, as performance. It's pretty unbelievable. But this work, the Chris Burden's B car, is actually sort of the tipping point where he left a lot of those early performance works, the sort of extreme, artists being electrocuted or shot or broken, scraped on glass and so on, into where he was starting to build these things. And it's a type of information art that he's actually demystifying technology. So B car is a project where he actually built his own car. Partly he admits that he just always wanted to do that, but partly to demystify this very complex machine that we use all the time, and actually built one that goes 100 miles an hour and gets 100 miles to the gallon. It's probably not very safe knowing it's Chris Burden. And he actually drove this from, I think it was Amsterdam to Paris, to different exhibitions. And the idea was that it was going to be a performance. And in doing this, he realized that it was so great just to build this thing and then talk to other people about how it was built, that this performance of driving, no doubt illegally through Europe, kind of fell by the wayside. And he's now done other projects in this same vein. And this is an example of this type of information art. So let's get back to the the kind of information that I'm dealing with here. So many large institutions like the Owens have these large collections of permanent artworks that they've bought over a large number of years. And given the finite size of the gallery space, they can only show so many at one time. So they have these archives that are just filled with different things, prints and paintings and drawings. Many of them are not even very light safe. Some of them are not framed, they're very fragile. And there's a sort of a need or a real interest in getting these things up into the gallery in some way. And I mean, probably the ideal way is to have, so much space you can show everything at once, right? But maybe that's not even possible, right? I mean, it's just in some of these large collections, like the large institutions. But there's been a digitization going on, or a documentation, and the Owens did this about, what, 2 or 3 years ago, 2 years ago? Even longer. So they actually had someone come in here for several months, I assume, and photograph every single piece of artwork in the collection. And this is quite an undertaking, but created from a computer science perspective, created a lot of great data. That's kind of what you think, or a lot of great content. And this was really something that was a great opportunity, because this is sort of where it sat, right? I think you had like basically a file folder full of a bunch of JPEGs or TIFFs of images, and we were trying to figure out a way, well, how can we use this amazing stuff? So there's a couple ways that you could go about this, and some other institutions have done this. So one way is, let's put an iMac in the corner, or maybe a touchscreen iMac, and we'll write a Flash application or something like that, and you'll have a way that you can navigate these different artworks, and you can type in the year, or give me painters from this, from the Netherlands, or something like this. And it is a way to access those artworks, but arguably it's not really a way, it's not any type of real gallery experience. It's really just it's a database. It's literally a database. And it's a great research tool, but it's not really a way to experience those works in some way that's more akin to how you would in many of these institutions. And there's quite a few other examples that go outside the institutions. Google has a big project where they've been gathering digital versions of artworks and information and metadata, and you can search for all different types of famous works. I mean, there's some copyright issues here, but whatever ones they can have access to. And there was a big, I mean, it's a little bit, it's still happening to a certain extent, but there was also this big notion that, well, one way to look at these artworks in more of a traditional gallery setting is we could just make the gallery virtual. And I don't know if you remember, there was this big virtual world thing going on. It still is going on a little bit, but we were all going to be avatars, and we're going to be sitting at keyboards in dark rooms and walking through virtual worlds and going to class that way and going to the coffee shop and going to a dance club, and we're going to art galleries too. And I mean, maybe there's some benefits to this because now space is infinite. You don't have to really worry about wall space and so on, but it's just part of the problem with this is you're not walking through a gallery space. You're sitting on a keyboard or using a mouse. And so partly the navigation is very awkward. And if you ever use one of these systems, it feels like you're just in a dream and you're kind of floating through space in this robot kind of way. And typically the colors are I mean, because computer scientists or technical people are often building these things, they can't resist to use, put really shiny reflective floors because they can do that, right? And that's what galleries should look like, right? Or to put all this stuff up in the top. And here's another example of where they're trying to simulate some museum. They've got a really good texture for the floor, for the wooden floor, for instance. And there's one of our avatars. And Google's done this maybe to a next level, and you've probably seen this too, that Google Street View, basically the same hardware that's sitting on top of that car that drove through Sackville a couple of years ago, they can walk through a gallery now too. And they can walk through and digitize a gallery, so you can actually walk through, and there's hundreds of them that are on there. But it's the same, although these are now real photos of whatever exhibition was up at that time, you still have this navigation problem to move through the space. You're still sitting and using a mouse or maybe an iPad and a touch screen, but you're not actually in the space. And you can see some copyright issues too, right? You can see some of those works are blurred out, and that's very intentional, right? They can use the same thing to blur people's faces to blur artworks that can't be shown outside of the gallery, which is another problem, because as soon as you do this kind of digital version art gallery, now it's outside, and anyone can see it, and you have to be careful about these issues. So another strategy is, well, maybe we can take technology and layer it on top of the gallery itself. And one way that's been, I mean, this is something that goes back some time, is audio tours. So that's something that's been goes back quite some time. And it looks like people are on telephones sometimes, or there's a program at the Louvre that has Nintendo DS that you can actually get, which I guess is better than holding one of these phones. I don't know. And you can go through, and it has, sometimes you just type in a code to get the current piece that you're at, or it even tells you where to go, and it just assumes that you're staying synchronized. But it is one way to bring a little bit more information, a little bit more understanding, and I would argue in a much less obtrusive way. Like, we're all used to going to, especially these big galleries, that everyone is, basically looks like they're on the phone, right, as they look at all the artworks in their own little world. There's another type of layering that, as more and more people carry smartphones and iPads, is to put these QR codes, which you see everywhere on magazines and on billboards and kind of things, and to actually augment the gallery space with these QR codes. You now pick up your phone, scan the QR code, it's going to give you some additional information. And you're getting that right in the same context of where the actual artwork is, so it's not about simulating the artwork, it's about adding extra information. And what's really good about these technologies is that it doesn't change the art gallery experience, basically looking at artwork. Because typically when you're in a gallery, that's what you're doing. You're often standing up, maybe sitting occasionally on a bench, and you're just wandering around and looking at things and turning corners and discovering new things as you're walking through that gallery space. And this is really the kind of experience that, going back to the proposal, that we really wanted to somehow get this kind of idea across, that it wasn't going to be a virtual gallery. It was going to actually be in the gallery space itself, but it was going to be an experience that is as close as possible to a current gallery experience. But it's about navigating artworks that aren't physically there. So it's not about layering things on. It's about actually bringing them up into the space itself. And here's just another page from that proposal. And I had a couple different ideas about how we could do this. I mean, some of them are, we were talking about interactive walls, interactive floors, the exterior projection, which I'll talk about a little bit later. It even looks like the Owens, if you think about the stonework and things like that in that. And what Siftor is really this, maybe the more conventional of these different scenarios, but it's basically a large wall, a large interactive wall, and that was what we ended up going with in this project. So when you get a large wall like this, you have to think about the right way to interact. And because we want to keep that kind of gallery experience of interaction, we had some constraints to work within. So in computer science, and actually in art as well, there's been a lot of research actually in using the body to interact with computers. And this guy, Myron Kruger, is quite well known and was trained as a computer scientist and became an artist through collaboration with other artists, and did a lot of work using the body to control the computer back in the early 1970s, which is quite incredible. And I'll just show a little bit of a demo video of how this works. So that's one of the images that he's generating. And what he used it for is to create these artificial reality experiences that he called. And it's basically using one example is to use your body to draw, your fingers. The other little playful scenarios where you could trap little characters inside and play these little games. It was really about play and about a fun kind of interaction. And the content was actually the interaction itself. Which is interesting in its own right, because this was quite a new thing at the time. And this has some nice synergies with, that's good. With my own work. So when I started out, this project is something that's been kicking around in my head for quite a while. In fact, when I applied to do my master's, I wanted to do essentially Siftor, but I didn't quite know how to do it at that time, which is interesting. So my first project is this, which is it's a much smaller display, obviously. And I'm using my body to interact, but you take a look, but I'm using almost too much of my body to interact. I'm also using a $500,000 motion tracking system. Things like this that we just happen to have sitting in our lab, which made a lot of this very easy. That's why I have the funny hat with the little baubles on the top, and those red cameras are all tracking me. But this project ended up being about ways to go from no interaction, basically just walking by the display, to getting closer and closer to actually using your finger to touch the screen directly. So moving through these higher levels of interaction. And it was a successful project. And what's interesting is that aesthetics was quite important. I have a background as a designer as well as I worked as a graphic designer for a while. And the treatment of these information graphics was important. Now, it's not art, I don't think at all, but it's better than Windows 3.1 or something like that, I guess, if you could leave me for that. And now, I mean, what's great is that there's this thing, and I'm sure you've all heard of the Kinect, which is in some ways replacing a large portion of that $500,000 motion tracker that I was using earlier. And it allows you to do all sorts of things for a very low cost. And it's really changing the way that we can interact, much as the same way that the iPhone and the iPad have moved away from the mouse for portable computing or the keypad for portable computing and moving into touch. But there's potentially a problem with this. And we'll just play this inspirational video.
Started with a sense that your voice and movement was magic.
Xbox, play.
We thought this would be fun to play with, and it was. Something amazing is happening. The world is starting to imagine things happening live. Unexpected things. Hopeful things.
I'm going to just really wants to be inspirational. OK, so. So what you see there is this vision for our future, potentially, right, where we use our bodies to interact in space, and we do all this pantomime kind of work. We manipulate molecules in space. But there's some issues with that, potentially. It's kind of tiring. You look a little stupid, right? But no one's really thinking about these kinds of issues. There's no real aesthetic lens onto this kind of interaction. It's just about, we can do it, and it's a new way to do it, and there's maybe some benefits, but we're not really thinking about some of the downsides to it. And this project is actually looking at those issues precisely. What is the right way to use your whole body to interact, but in the correct way, specifically the correct way for an art gallery? So there's another way that we could do it too, which is another interesting project, which I didn't know about in doing this work until I just discovered this. In fact, I think it was just released or announced or launched in the fall of the previous year. And this is another vision for augmenting a gallery with digital information, including this very large wall. So let me just take a look. It's also very inspirational. So come see amazing. And it is pretty amazing. I mean, it's pretty cool stuff, right? I mean, it was a $10 million project, right? So it's just, tons and tons of money, tons of time, and I think some really positive results. This is actually the largest touchscreen computer in North America, potentially the world, and it has a very nice quality display. The displays alone are about $500,000, and it's another way to view all the artworks in this gallery, but using touch. So you can actually watch someone use it. They're walking up to what look like icons of all the different artworks and touching and moving them around. And it's a giant iPad in some ways, which is great, but it is, I would argue, is a little bit like a really amazing iMac in the corner, right? It is still a type of database. It's just a much nicer looking database. But it's not about, this is a tool to find art. It's not about experiencing two-dimensional artworks, and it's not an artwork on its own right. But it is amazing. I mean, I'll give them, it definitely is that. So there's some inspiration in a branch of human-computer interaction, or a subfield of human-computer interaction, looking at aesthetic interaction, which in some ways is really wonderful because there are scientists and psychologists and artists getting together and looking at these really subtle and unobtrusive ways to interact. And one of the great projects that I always like pointing to, which I think really epitomizes this kind of interaction, how subtle it can be, is this pillow project. And what it is are they're networked pillows. So the idea is that you have a loved one or someone that you're connected to that's in a far away distance. You plug in wireless or an Ethernet jack in the back of the pillow. And when that person lays on their pillow, your pillow glows. And when you lay on your pillow, their pillow glows. And that's it. That's all it does. You can't talk into it or write on it or anything like that. But it's this really fundamental kind of interaction, which is both, it's aesthetic, both actually in visual aesthetics as well. I mean, it actually looks kind of nice, right? It doesn't look too garish. But it also is this interaction doesn't feel odd, right? You just lay on a pillow, right? And you just feel this warmth that someone else is there, which is kind of nice. And I just wanted to bring that kind of feeling into this kind of experience, because when you think back to what a gallery experience looks like, this is kind of what it looks like for the most part. People standing and staring and looking at artworks. So here's an early sketch, well actually not even the earliest sketch, but of Siftor. And you can see that it has some similarities with what I just showed you of people just standing in a gallery. And the idea was really, can we create a large white wall and put two-dimensional artworks on it? And can people just select those artworks in some way using their body that doesn't feel stupid and it feels a lot like a gallery experience? And that's where the way people interact, it's a very interesting research question, because people aren't used to interacting this way. So a big part of this project is to see, well, can people figure it out, or does it even matter if they figure it out, or what do they try to do? These kinds of issues are very interesting. So at this point, I could have showed a bunch of videos of how Siftor works, but I thought it's just sitting there in the next room. So maybe we could all, it's not too many of us, we can just go into the gallery for a bit, for about maybe 10 minutes. I'll give some demos of how it works, and I'll also show you a little bit behind the scenes as well. So I was just talking about this aesthetic kind of interaction, and visual and the way we interact as well. And the way the system works, it's extremely minimal and subtle on purpose, because it's not that Cleveland Art Museum giant iPad. Like, I really wanted to not have that kind of feeling. And when you first walk into the space, you notice this strip across the bottom, which in my code, I call it a strip. I don't know. Someone mentioned it looked like a defragging hard drive visualization, which I'm OK with that. I think that's kind of nice. And what that is that's actually representing every two-dimensional artwork in the Owens collection. So there's 2,809, or I keep forgetting the number, but there's around 2,800, I think, that are in this database. Two-dimensional, yeah, because I wasn't able, again, it was sort of an aesthetic choice that I didn't want to show ceramics and sculpture on here. It didn't seem right, so limited to two-dimensional artworks. Every artwork is a slice, and the color of that slice is the average color of that artwork. So I wrote a program that went through and computed the average color of each one. Not always a good approximation, like that one is probably a dark blackish color, but it gives you some sense. You can certainly tell the difference between drawings and some of these darker paintings. And what Siftor is doing, even though no one's actually interacting with it right now, is every half minute to 2 minutes, it basically picks an artwork randomly from the strip and pulls it up and keeps it up for about 2 or 3 minutes. It's random, and then pulls it back down. It'll never show the same artwork. It'll never show the same artwork twice on the screen at the same time. Like, it does know that it's already up on the screen. In fact, if you look carefully, like that one that just went up, you can see a little white gap. Sometimes if the colors are dark around, it actually leaves a space where that artwork went up until it went down. So I can now walk into the space, and Siftor will start tracking me and recognizes me, and now offers me a way to navigate. And now I can have some control. It's not just Siftor doing the control, but I can actually control it as well. And I can actually walk along here. I can view all the thumbnails of the different artworks. And notice that I'm not, like, all I'm doing is I'm just walking. In fact, if I walk too quickly, Siftor goes, "You're walking too quickly. You're not really in the mode." Like, this isn't a game. This is not a Connect game. And if I want to pick one, I just walk forward. So I haven't really done, there's no arm waving or anything like that. I've just done things that I probably would almost do at a gallery anyway. And now, because I'm up close, it says, it knows that I'm close enough to now to view the artwork, and it gives me a little bit more information. In fact, I could walk over to these ones too, or that one, because it just took it down. And now it'll give me some information on that. So it knows that I'm looking at that particular one. And in fact, now that I've looked at both of these, they're not going to go, Siftor's not going to pull them down for 2 or 3 minutes. It'll leave them up because I just looked at them. And if I go back and look at that one again, it'll reset the clock, so to speak. And that's how it is. And then I can step back for another one, take a step forward, pull something else up. One thing that people find maybe frustrating or interesting is that you can't, I've seen like you be looking like this and you'd be trying to get, okay, you know, and if Roxy claims he can do it, I think I did it. So if you really do these kind of strange contortions, you probably, if you can almost figure it out and pick particular ones. But it's meant to be this serendipitous discovery. And I'm enforcing that by making this, I mean, you're picking 1 pixel, right, with your body. Of course it's not going to be that accurate. And the other thing I didn't mention is that this strip is being constantly resorted all the time, or sifted if you want to call it that. So right now it looks like it's doing it based on value, so from very light to very dark. And in about 30 minutes, every 30 minutes it'll do a new sort. So it'll sort on value or saturation or color, and in ascending and descending. So there's 6 different sort orders, and it pauses in between for about 10 minutes to do that. And we can do, so there's a couple, so that's, what I just showed you is essentially the basic interaction. But you can spend some time, like, you know, looking through this and finding different artworks, and I've seen people spend a remarkable amount of time doing things. And you really do discover things that you didn't really know about, which is the point. There's some hidden things too, and I showed one, and I'll show it again now at the opening, but there's some hidden types of interactions that people don't typically know about or it's hard to discover, and I just need a volunteer. Jane, can you be my volunteer? So you need to just, so if 2 people, and it works only when 2 people stand up, so right now it obviously supports multiple people at one time, so that's good to know. And if we both so if you start moving to the far wall, so away from me, and just move kind of close to the end. So now we've gone into sort of a special mode. Make sure and you can see that it's starting to sort even more quickly. I always feel frozen when I'm doing this because it'll go really quickly soon. So now it's doing by hue, you can see. Saturation. And it pauses just for a moment when it reaches those sorts. And then value the other way. And we could stand here all day as it just keeps sorting and sorting and sorting. So I wanted to put in some of these little, I mean, partly because it's sort of fun to do, the people that know about it. But it's also fun to have this little bit of knowledge. Part of the idea is that visitors come and maybe they see someone else do this or saw one of these demos and they go like, hey, you should come and check this thing out. And 2 people, you can do this little trick. And there's another one that we can do. So but we need a 3rd person. So will you be my volunteer? Okay. So I need 1 person. So 1 person stands in the center, like sort of lined up with, and we all have to be, I'm trying to remember now, I think we all have to be a little bit closer so the bar is the upper bar. So take a step forward, and then Jane, just come forward a little bit. So now if we wait here, so this one, it takes some patience to get going. Now it's going to start. So you can see it's starting to pick things much more frequently. And as Jennifer pointed out, it sounds a bit like a train, which I didn't. If you know me and trains, it's sort of funny, but it wasn't intentional. And it's another great way, like, so you're seeing something, it's pulling up lots of things very quickly. And if as soon as I step out, so I've broken it now and I've stepped away. But now you could go along and actually look at all these different things and find out what they are as well. So just another little hidden piece that's there. I'll quickly show, thank you, volunteers. Yeah. I'll quickly show just a little bit about how this works, just to demystify it a little bit. So in the ceiling, there are 2 cameras. You can see with the red and the blue lights. And there are 4 infrared emitters, those square, rectangular type things up there. So those are actually making a really strong light that you can't see at 850 nanometers, just beyond the visual spectrum. If you stare at them long enough, you'll get sore eyes because your pupils don't know to close. But I'll show you what. So what's interesting is that, so now I've just ruined the whole thing because it's just Windows, right? Like this is just a giant Windows computer, right? Like people don't think about that, right? But that's what it is, right? It's just, and I've got software running on this giant, so here's the program that's running the display, which is written in this language called processing. You can see it's doing something down here, giving me a little bit of reporting. It's pretty, there's a lot here, there's quite a bit of code, to make all these different things work. Here's the other piece, which is interesting. So there's a separate program that's actually doing the tracking. So this is showing you the raw view of the camera. So you can see me, and I've basically written my own software to stitch these images together from the cameras. And it's doing what's called, very technically, blob tracking. That's actually what it's called. And it's basically looking at, it knows what the background looks like with this kind of lighting. The great thing about the art gallery is I can really control the lighting. This would be murder if it was in a shopping mall or something like that with a window. And it knows what the background looks like, and it knows when anything steps on top. So it doesn't know anything about people, it just knows that there's something. So if you threw a bag or rolled a chair out there, it would just think it's a person. It doesn't know anything about people. And it doesn't know anything about hands either. It just sees things moving around. In fact, the system is designed so that you can actually, so I can use my hands and I can do kind of Kinect style if I want, or I can even use my feet. But you can see that all I'm doing is just looking at the blob, right? So whether I walk forward or not. And that's actually designed intentionally so that people can interact in different ways so I can watch them and see what they do. And the other tricky thing is that little pink piece that's actually the point that's being tracked, because you can see that there's a lot of noise. Like the blue part keeps shifting around because the light is just changing a little bit in here. And that's I have to brag a little bit because that's actually a filtering technique that I invented that was published just last year, called the €1 filter, strangely enough. But it's actually a key part of the system. If we didn't have that filtering technique, it would be really difficult to work very easily. I think that's all I'm going to show. So then so all this stuff is just, so now we're back to normal Sifter mode. So that's, any questions before we go back in? But just for the. Right, so this is never here. Yeah, so I should clarify, this is, so these are tucked in underneath in the back. Otherwise, they probably would go for it, and it's hooked up to the internet. They might be checking their email or something like that, right? So, right, so yeah, normally you wouldn't see this. But now you all know, and you can sneak back and do that. So it intentionally doesn't go crazy, but what happens is people merge. Like this is one thing I can show you. So if I can you come with me? Yeah. So watch what happens. So the one problem is, so right now we're both our own people, and we each have our own, but as soon as I step a little bit too close, now we're one person. The opening, there are so many people that we just became a big blob. And the blob can be pretty, so if you stay there, because of the shadows, sometimes it's pretty subtle, but we can be, so there's some potential improvements I can do to my algorithm. I have ideas on how to reduce some of this shadow overlap, but because we're this far apart, we should still be separate, but yet we're not because of the lighting of the shadow. But the good thing is that it's quite robust. It doesn't break, right? It just does something maybe a little bit less expected. It is being recorded. Yeah, I'm going to talk a bit more in there, but I am. So there's a camera. I mean, right above the gallery security camera, you're already being recorded, but I have my own camera up above, so I'm recording there. And I'm also recording all the movement. So everything that we've just done here, it's all being logged. In fact, it's being logged and sent to my computer at home even via Dropbox, right? So it's part of it, right? Because that's part of because I'm interested as a computer science researcher in how people use their body to interact. And this is actually an amazing test bed to do that, right? Like, how do they try to figure it out? What kind of things do they do first? Do they use their arms or their hands? Where do they walk up to the display? Do they walk to the center? Do they walk to the edge? Like, these are all kind of open questions, right? That I can gather data and have some kind of results. I hope. I mean, that's the intention, but I'll have the data, so. Right. Oh, thank you, thank you, thank you. So that's really important. So let me turn this thing off for a moment. It was really important to me that these things are in one-to-one scale. And apparently they're pretty close. Like, there's some problems maybe in the database, or maybe there's some slight scaling issues, but when you look at something on an iMac or even in that Gallery 1 giant wall, like, they're all small, right? You know how you go to you see the Mona Lisa for the first time and you're like, what? It's that? I thought it was this huge thing, because you've only seen it reproduced in books and things. So here, and we saw some really big ones when we were doing that quick mode. You know, some of them will fill up the entire space. There's some little etchings that are, you know, this big. Now, the one thing is the resolution is not, these are both HD projectors, so 1900 by 1260 or whatever the resolution is, which are pretty good projectors. Like, they're pretty expensive and good projectors, but they're not, you know, they're much lower resolution than real artwork. So this is not about replacing the experience of viewing something in the wall. It's about discovering things and then maybe looking for an opportunity to see the real thing later. But scale, I think, is something that really changes things. Really changes things. And it's almost a shame that if you don't see something on the wall, we never see them at the right scale, right, in a textbook. All right, let's go back and I'll finish, and I'll talk a little bit more. So I wanted to show you a little bit, kind of still with this Wizard of Oz kind of behind the curtain thing. I'll show you a little bit of the equipment that's in the back, because we didn't have a chance to look at that. It's interesting that it's actually designed that you can, like, we intentionally didn't put barriers. Like, you can actually go and peek around and see this. But in the back, there are 2 computers, 2 projectors, and like I said, they're running Windows. They're sitting on plinths. They're just lined up by hand. You know, that's the miracle of how it works. The screen itself is a special screen, typically used in theater, but it's essentially a really thick and expensive shower curtain. I mean, it's the same material, really. So one challenge for me, like just getting down to maybe the low, how do you build this kind of thing? I don't have a space like this at the University of Waterloo. So it's really challenging to try to prototype this and to build something, right? And to get a sense, you know, number one, to even know how it works, and then to design it in the first place without actually walking into the space. And I can show you some of the early tests. Like, you can tell from the scale. So here, this is a light switch, right? So some of the earliest tests were really rough versions of Siftor, you know, probably about the space of 2 large monitors, and trying to get a sense of even how the projectors would work together. We did some tests like this, where this is just in our lab space. You can see the printer and research posters and things, and just getting a sense, well, how big is this thing going to be for real, and doing a back or a front projection, so you get shadows and things, but just got one of the guys in the lab to stand in front just to get a sense. There's that Michael Snow piece that's just on the wall over there, right there. And then to test the vision system, what I have is I have a rig in my desk. It basically has 2 cameras, and I use my fingers a little bit like people. So I just have this area marked out. See those little tape marks on the green? That's like the rectangle in front of the gallery. And the full vision system runs that. In fact, I can even run the tiny little, I can make this little miniature little sifter of my own. And of course, I can run it with a mouse and things too to test some of it. And then this is just me testing the cameras as high as I could with the tripod in the lab, which is not nearly as high as what we have. But these are all challenges in doing this kind of large-scale work. And it's the first time I've done something this big that is this, you know, it's largely site-specific, really, certainly for a large room. And then installing, I just always have to give credit to Roxy, who's amazing, and the time. It took us about, well, I mean, it didn't take that long at all. Actually, it probably took Roxy like 4 days to get the screen up, which I was really impressed. But, you know, there's a lot of logistics even in that, like what kind of aircraft cable to use, how do you keep it from billowing in the wind, all this kind of stuff. And then the tuning process too. So I spent a couple days before the show opened sitting much like what you saw there with a desk chair and just programming on this giant computer, because it was the most efficient way to sort of tune the code and make sure it felt right. Like there's so many parameters, how fast should people move, how close should they get, thickness of lines, like all that is the tuning phase you can't really do until the thing is actually in there. Just another view of the back. So these two computers, in fact, Siftor really only runs on one computer. I got two just in case. The other computer is actually running, is logging the security camera. So that's part of this research. So many of you noticed, although, hopefully everyone notices for the sake of the University of Waterloo Ethics Board, the sign posted on the entry to the gallery, just so you know that you are being recorded. I'm not saving your name or looking up your bank account or anything like that, but I need to, when you do research like this at a university, you need to get approvals for this kind of thing. And what it's essentially doing, like I said, is logging data and logging security cameras. So here's a shot. There's a picture of my security camera. That was an image just from the opening when I was doing a similar demonstration with people crowded around me from the opening. So I can go back and look at, although oddly enough, that computer just crashed today, the security camera, so I don't have any data from what we just did, but I have all my other data still saved. And I can go back and look at those different images. So I have to get that working again. And it also does this. So it's basically always logging. So it's logging every position that every person is in a coordinate system. So it's hard to see, but so this is a visitor. So V is a visitor 8,935. And they're standing 3.2 meters in the X position and 374 millimeters in the Y position, and they're moving about one millimeter per second and half a millimeter per second. Essentially, they're standing still. And it's logging that 60 times a second, which is a bit overkill. And it fills up these logs. You can see that, so each of these logs is generated on March 8th. So about every minute, it's filling up a megabyte. Each one of these is exactly a megabyte. That's how my logging software works. And it's filling it up, and it's filling it up, and it just keeps. So on my home computer, in fact, even on my iPhone, I can call these up. I can just see the thing filling these things up constantly and logging all this data, which from a scientific perspective is amazing. Like, it's really interesting stuff. It's, like I said, it's a little bit overkill, but you always want to lean on the fact of just logging everything. So just before, I just wanted to, there is another artwork in this exhibition, this My Name is Owen. And the two actually do work really well together, although Siftor has more of a research component to it. This is more of I guess, a pure artwork, if you want to call it that. This My Name is Owen. So hopefully some of you have seen it. It's in the gallery, the next gallery as well, but it's also projected on an exterior window at night, which I think is the best way to view it, I think, although it's been quite cold recently, so you just stand out in the cold to do it. And it's interesting, just returning to that proposal, that there was this other idea of some kind of use of the window. So I managed to kind of sneak in 2 out of 3 on this project, although it's not interactive. And all it does, if you've seen it, is shows snippets of text, basically sentences, words and sentences, and it does this constantly, all the time. And how these sentences are generated, they're all text taken from the Owens website. So I basically wrote some software to go to the Owens website, download all the sentences that are on the website. In fact, I can show you, not that you have to memorize what this is, but there's the program that actually grabs the text from the website, written in a language called Python. It grabs a bunch of things like this. These are all the sentences extracted from the website. You can see bits and pieces of it from different pages. I wrote another software, a really simple program to what they call tokenize it. So it basically creates all these little tokens. So it went from, so on the website alone, there's about 56,000 characters on the website. And I've tokenized that to about 9,800 tokens. So there's 9,800 words or punctuation on the website, which is not actually a lot for this kind of thing. It would actually be better to even have more, but it still works out quite well. And then with that list of tokens, I write yet another little program, And what this program does is it actually generates the sentences. And it uses a pseudo-random language model. Essentially, it looks at sequences of words. It takes two words like the artist, and then it would look on the website and go, well, how often, what is the third word that follows the artist? And maybe the artist shows up 10 times, and it'll pick randomly from one of those words that it follows. And that's how it constructs. So it knows nothing about grammar. All it knows about are orders. And it generates these sentences like this. In fact, it generates 256,227 sentences, which is approximately the number of sentences that it will show over the duration of the exhibition. So in fact, not only is it showing these random little pieces of text, but every single one is unique. Every single, like, it'll never repeat again. So if you see one, that's it. And I worked really hard, both in the generating, so I had to write code to make sure it didn't generate the same one, and even to verify it didn't generate the same one. Some of them are amazing, like this exhibition showcases all the work stored in drawer 22 of the artwork, as if they were copying. Like it does make these really believable kind of phrases, and sometimes they actually are, because it's a random process, it's entirely possible that they are the actual sentences on the website. And sometimes it does do that. Like there's a lot of, the catalog was, the catalog forward was written by Jemmy Kelly, right? Like that shows up, words to that extent show up many, many times on the website. But then often it'll tack on a little bit, Jemmy Kelly and an artist, right? And an artwork, or like added these little extra pieces on top. And so how this thing works is that, so there's actually two computers. And I'll just show you, this is one of the, you can get a peek into a slice of Jemmy's office in this picture. So there's an ancient laptop of mine actually running Linux, of all things. And it's running 24 hours a day, just running a program to basically show this text. And then there's another computer sitting up in the ceiling of that gallery, and it's doing the same thing, and it's going along, and but what's cool is that the software that I wrote, again, in processing, is pretty simple in terms of displaying the text, but it does one little trick in that both of them write a little file to each of their hard drives, which is hooked up to Dropbox, and Dropbox synchronizes the two across, and all that file essentially has in it is the sentence number that they're each showing. So in fact, they're synchronized. And in fact, if I can do this computer knows about that. Where is processing? So if I can actually show you if this will work. Here's the little program here. And I can push play. And it's going to crash. Look at that. All right, well, that's unfortunate. Oh, no, wait, it's here. Okay. So I think what happened is that I think it actually didn't find, I don't think it found the synchronized gallery, because I think if I look at this, so there's my debug. Oh, yeah, no, it did find it. Look at that. So when you're a programmer, you always have something called debug mode. And that's where you turn, and I should have shown you that, and Siftor has that too. So it's telling me that it's right here. It's on sentence number 31,445. So that's as far as the machines have gone since the opening, which is not too bad. It's just been over a week. And it tells me some other information, like how much memory is free and things to diagnose any problems. Because this computer also knows that same file that's going. So this sentence that you're seeing right now, if you peek around the corner, should be the sentence that is showing in that gallery, or approximately that. Right, so that's running. So I encourage you at night to go and check it out. I took some photos last night. It was miserably cold, but it is kind of fun to see, and it is ethereal to a certain extent. So just to close up, the reason why, I do like this one little sentence, because both of these works are really about the Owens, right? And they're really about, Siftor is quite literally about the collection. My Name is Owen is really about the people and the connections that the gallery has, because you see a lot of these familiar names. So there's a really nice congruency between the two pieces, in that they're actually, essentially I've just built platforms, and the content is already built in here. In fact, the content, especially knowing people in the Owens, especially My Name is Owen, going by at night and seeing these familiar names and seeing Sweetest Little Thing, or talking about Sackville or Mrs. Wells' class at Marshview Middle School, and these kind of things, it's kind of wonderful, right, to see these little little pieces. So that's why I like this particular phrase in this button so much, which was generated by that program. So I should just have the typical stock car slide just to thank, some various funding institutions that did this, since we're being recorded, and that is important. This work would not, like all the equipment really is, the funding is coming from University of Waterloo. So that's wonderful, right? So, and the Banting postdoctoral fellowship. And I do have a website which has a lot of stuff that well, actually not a lot that I showed today, but that will happen soon. But a lot of other things too, if you're interested or want to ask any questions, you can just search. I think you can almost just search Dan Vogel, but Dan Vogel non sequitoria or Dan Vogel Waterloo will get you there too. And that's the end of my talk. So we could take any questions, I suppose. So. You could, if you're really patient, you could do it, but even if you're scanning that strip, it's sifting it even as you do it. So, the easy answer is that's not the purpose of Sifter. There needs to be some other, finder or some other thing like it where you can actually find specific things. Like many people, when they go to the Louvre, they want to see the Mona Lisa, because that's, or Starry Night if it's there, or whatever, these kinds of, big artworks. I think there are ways, like I've got many, many ideas to extend Sifter, to bring some of these ideas in, I believe without losing sort of the simpleness and the elemental side. And there are, if you look back, even in the research proposal, there are some of these ideas about once you discover an artwork, a way to kind of keep it, right? Or to kind of take it with you in some simple way, right? Whether using, one idea was just to have simple cards, which would have probably those ugly QR codes, but they're not on the wall, they're on a card, so I'm okay with it that way. And you would show the card to Sifter, so you basically would see the artwork, you'd show it to Sifter through the screen, and then it would go, okay, you're Dan Vogel, I'll remember that one for you later. And you could walk up later, show the card to Sifter, and it would bring up some of those ones that you found. So after the fact, you could find things. But to do like a database search and say you want to find a particular one, that's probably still best with something like an iMac. Although it'd be interesting to take an iMac or an iPad, kind of like a very database search system, like find particular artwork, and then even have that being able to pull up in the wall. I don't think it would change things, but it wouldn't. If it's done right, would not destroy the system, I think, or take away from some of the benefits of the aesthetics of the system. I don't know. So the one challenge is we can't travel with the Owens collection because there are copyright issues, right? In fact, we calculated that there's about 600 or 700 artworks that are out of copyright because the artist has been dead for more than 50 years. Because actually there was a request. Someone, they wanted to, there was at the Toronto Convention Center, there was something that they said, oh, it would be great to put this up. And I looked into it, and it's a lot to set up for something like that. But we've talked about, so I have contacts with that company that makes that really expensive display. It's called Christie, and they just coincidentally are based in Kitchener-Waterloo. Who knew? And they make all these big movie theater projectors, like very high end, and they really understand resolution and color. That's their business. And I did have a meeting with them just before coming out here where I showed some of the initial works, and right away they were like, productize, right? Like we could sell this, we could sell this. And to be honest, it doesn't, well, I mean, it's kind of weird, but I guess I'm not against that, right? I mean, if it goes, I mean, this isn't the nuclear bomb, right? I mean, like this is maybe a good kind of thing to get out there, right? And I'd be really excited to get access to their display hardware, right? Like I could see this as a way to get there, for them to give me $300,000 worth of a display is no big deal, right? They just pull them off the factory line and almost, right? And so yeah, there's some talk about that, but it's a lot of work to set up in its present form, so it is, but the screen does pack into a box this size, right? So, I mean, it's somewhat portable, but. there's a little bit of mastery to kind of figure out, oh, it's distance-based, and I know, but I've seen people learn this in just a few minutes. And the great thing is that when they learn it, a little bit of mastery is good, because then you feel like you've mastered it and you've gained something and you really enjoy it. Where if I had a giant, instruction booklet when you walked in and said, here are the different lines, or we painted lines on the gallery floor, I mean, then this is what would happen. This is my worry with productization, that this is what will happen, right? Like this kind of stuff. But so yeah, I think that's a little bit of, but in the end, it's quite robust to different kinds of people, different kinds of interactions, and it's quite nice. I'm really interested in the other side too. Like Conte is a project where there's actually a lot of mastery. It's actually quite hard to use, but it's not meant for people to walk in a gallery and use it. It's meant for a designer or someone to use this thing day in, day out, and they're going to learn how to use it, right? Because they'll get a benefit later. So I'm interested in both ends of the spectrum, but yeah, I hadn't really thought of, I mean, like there are many, it is wonderful that it would work for someone in a wheelchair, right? Or even little children, tall people, it doesn't matter, right? And it's sort of a nice part of it.